Thank you so much for joining us today for the NELA and MP co-branded webinar. Topic for today is employee training best practices for transportation companies. Sometimes it's difficult to navigate both from a requirement perspective as well as a best practices perspective what you need to do. I think especially in the transportation industry because there are so many different rules and regulations depending on all these different variables that we might not have the answer for today, but we'll at least hopefully point you in the right direction and talk about one big change from this year that does seem to apply across the board. So for those members who are not familiar with MP, we're a full service human capital management and HR company. So we provide everything from payroll, time and attendance, benefits, recruiting and hiring assistance, and HR services to businesses of all sizes across the country. Quick legal disclaimer. Today's presentation is from an HR best practices perspective for educational and informational purposes. I am unfortunately not an attorney, so please don't construe anything shared today as legal advice. My name is Paul Carelis. I am the Vice President of HR and Tax Credit Services at MP. Been here for 8 years and change and really looking forward to diving into this topic with you. If at any time you have a question, please just throw that into the Q&A that you'll see in the options bar on the Zoom, and we'll do our best to get to any questions you might have. So in terms of what we hope to cover today is just a reminder to check your applicability for various training and certification requirements. We'll talk about exploring any existing resources you might have. We'll talk about the importance of training and how much it means to the success of your organization. We'll go over what I view as the top 5 employee training topics for people within your industry, both on the road and in the office. We'll talk about the importance of managerial and supervisory training, as well as some topics to consider for that. And then we'll also discuss the pros and cons of the various training formats and hopefully help you determine which one or which mix is right for you. So quickly, as I said, the transportation industry is very tricky to dice and dissect in terms of what's applicable to livery companies, what's applicable to freight transportation companies and delivery companies, and the size of the vehicles and the number of passengers, or if you're transporting children or whatnot. But there was a new requirement by the Federal Motor Carrier Board this past year. So as of February 7th of this year, anyone wishing to do any of the 3 bullet points here for the first time does need to complete an entry-level driver training. So anyone obtaining a Class A or Class B CDL for the first time, anyone upgrading their CDL, or anyone looking to obtain a school bus endorsement, a passenger endorsement, or hazardous materials endorsement for the first time. So any of those people doing that, again, folks who already have these are grandfathered in. They are not required to go back. And also provided that they're renewing while their CDL and their endorsements are still active, that they don't let them expire. If they're renewing, they don't have to complete this. This is strictly for new endorsements and new licensure. If you do need resources on finding this training, the Federal Motor Carrier website does have a list of training providers. But you will run into that. And I know a lot of businesses with such a scramble to find talent and hire folks are bringing in people from outside of the industry. So you very well may be in a situation where you're bringing someone in that's just now obtaining their CDL. So if it's been from the last couple months, they are going to have this training in place and completed. After that, depending on where you're located, where you do business, what types of places you're driving folks to can really create different requirements. Everything from certain trainings that need to be completed, certain certifications. I know some contracts will require at least drivers to be background checked or drug screened or whatever it may be. So um, it's really important you work with a professional on your team or outside to review the states, the cities, the airports, um, other places that you do business in to see what obligations you have to be compliant. So first things first, before you really explore, training topics and things like that, um, we've talked to a number of individuals and a number of businesses who have gotten resources, virtual and a lot electronic trainings, and sometimes even discounts on their policies um, when they've completed certain training topics. So, first things first, I highly recommend that you speak to your insurance provider, the liability insurance, workers' comp, automobile insurance, all of those things. Speak to those, and if you work with a broker, certainly speak with your broker to see what they provide especially at a low to no cost. And then again, certain defensive driving courses, other driver skill courses, things like that that can realize a real discount on your policy. So, first things first, definitely recommend doing that before anything else. And I think we get so busy in our day to day. Those of you who are business owners and managers and decision makers, um, you're focused on getting revenue in the door, making sure you've got the staff to get the jobs done, um, and that you're getting paid for the jobs that you're doing. And it's very easy to get caught up in that cycle and just try to keep your business afloat. Especially these have been extremely turbulent times in the transportation industry over the last several years, both due to disruptors in the marketplace as well as pandemic and every other variable. The Great Resignation, um, a really cutthroat market for talent and employees. It's just extremely difficult times for the industry. So it's very easy to get caught up in that and not focus on what we can really be doing outside of compensation and things like that to retain the folks, because I think we've all felt the pain of how difficult it is to find new workers. So it's really important, as much as we get stuck in the weeds, to really focus on what can we do to keep the workers here, especially the ones that we value and that have potential and that would really hurt to lose. So it's really important to really think about training as one of those spokes in the wheel of a happy and healthy and engaged and ultimately retained employee. So certainly compensation, management, which we'll talk about in a little bit, is an important factor there. There are several factors that keep employees happy, but um, training is sometimes a forgotten element of that. And just to pull a few data points from some studies, Zonify did a study not too long ago, and 92% of the respondents said that a well planned training program has a favorable impact on their engagement with their employer. The Society of Human Resources Management also did a study that found that over half of workers have kind of sought out training on their own and done their own self training um, because they felt that the training opportunities provided to them by their current employer were insufficient. So people are desperate to learn and grow and want to improve themselves. So if they don't get it from you, they might go about it on their own, or they might look for opportunities that sell or promise that to them. On the retention piece, LinkedIn Learning did a study, and 94% of employees in their study said that they would stay longer at a company that provides learning and development. And in terms of the Great Resignation and people leaving, almost two-thirds of resigning workers in an Inc. magazine study said that lack of training was one of the reasons that they left their company. So, some real numbers here, some staggering numbers, but really just point to the importance of investing a little bit of time and possibly a little bit of money on training to keep your employees. So, in terms of what we recommend, aside from very specific, granular, the driving skills, the defensive driving, the driving etiquette, um, the employees, both whether they're on the road, whether they're dispatchers, whether they're supervisors, whether they're cleaning the vehicles, um, there are kind of five universal topics that we feel are can be really engaging and really powerful and get a employees who feel that they're being valued because you're investing in training for them, and b help your company because these having these skills will either lessen your liability, lessen your exposure, or create more skilled or at least more consistent employees for you. The first of which is kind of the gold standard, so preventing harassment in the workplace. um, Harassment claims did dip a little bit during the pandemic because so many people were working remotely and not in direct contact with one another. But we're starting, the numbers haven't been released yet for this year, but we're definitely starting to see a spike, at least anecdotally, in the businesses that we work with, as people return to the office, as people are doing more traveling, getting together more often, going out for drinks, things like that. Harassment is occurring. People have kind of forgotten how to behave. So um, it's especially important in the transportation industry and in the livery industry because you are dealing with the public. As you can imagine, just the public relations disaster that can happen if your employees aren't acting appropriately either with one another or, God forbid, with a customer or client of yours. I just saw a question come in, not to interrupt, but yes, we will provide both a recording and a copy of the slides. We'll send that out to everybody who registered. But yeah, in terms of harassment, it's a huge potential liability and exposure for businesses. Um, and depending where you do business, some states do require harassment training. Some of it's dependent on size, like Connecticut and Maine. Others are more across the board. Massachusetts doesn't currently require harassment training, but if you have six or more employees, they do require you to have a harassment policy. And that harassment policy has to be distributed at least once a year. So our recommendation here is while you're distributing that policy, great time to do a training. And it can be a quick one too. You can cover the basics of harassment in 30 minutes or less. Certainly, if you want to have it be more interactive and have activities and group work and things like that, you can stretch it for probably a couple hours. Um, but anywhere in between, really. And if you really just want to hit home the main bullet points, you can have an effective harassment training, and again, in 30 minutes or less. Number two is customer service. So I think a lot of us try to hire for people with good customer service skills, at least those of us who work in customer facing industries. Certainly transportation, and most of your employees are customer facing at one point or another, whether it's your sales folks, the drivers certainly, and everyone in between. So I think sometimes we assume what people come on board with in terms of their customer service skills based on how they interview or where they came from previously. But I'm sure, as you've experienced as people in your various positions, um, we've all dealt with some customer service nightmares. And um, especially if they're coming from another industry, they might not be working used to working with the same level of clientele that you work with or the same personality types or in the same capacity. They might be in a previous role that wasn't as customer service heavy as some of the roles within the transportation industry can be. So um, I think it's often overlooked, but doing some quality customer service training with your staff can A, make sure that all the bases are covered, that they know what they need to, but B, can really be part of a consistent process. So if you want to have a certain look, a certain image, a certain culture, a certain way of defining your brand from a customer service perspective, that really needs to be trained. You want to know what you need to tell people what you expect them to say, how you expect them to respond to inquiries. Um, the more consistent that you can get with that, the more consistent of a brand that you have for your business. So, customer service training is can be really invaluable. Third is conflict resolution. So, again, I'm sure you've all dealt with various nightmares um, that have occurred um, in employment, both internal fighting, conflicts between customer and employee, all the various things that I don't need to tell you. I'm sure you've lived it. So even at the highest level and most basic content, doing some conflict resolution training just to give people the basics of how to handle certain situations and how to avoid things from escalating and how to diffuse a situation or who they should talk to when things get beyond what you'd want them to handle. Conflict resolution training can really assist with that. Number four is time and task management. So I can't think of many industries other than livery service where being on time and being punctual is a crucial element of the business. A lot of businesses want people to be punctual and on time, and it's important. But a business like yours, it's even more so. So again, hiring people from outside, they might not always come with that skill set. We might ask a certain interview question that leads us to believe that they're punctual and that this isn't going to be an issue. But I know just in the livery companies I've worked with in the past, from an HR standpoint, um, we certainly haven't always had the most reliable workforce, or just ones that are get into good habits to make sure that their time management and task management is well organized. So a little bit of time invested in time and task management training with your employees can really get them into better habits so that they're fulfilling your schedules. You're not getting those angry phone calls that people are late or not showing up. So time and task management is especially important within your industry. And then five is communication skills. So that can take different forms depending on the audience. Um, I think for your salespeople, your marketing people, the people who are sending out quotes and estimates and all of that, um, really, really stress the importance of email etiquette training. Um, so often, especially with the younger workforce who may not be used to, proper form in communications, having an open to the email that says, "Hi, John," or "Dear John," or, some sort of opening salutation, having a well organized body to the communication and a closing and a follow up and signing with your name. So often people have gotten used to the texting culture, or are otherwise unfamiliar with how to properly communicate, especially if you're doing business to business work. It's just really important and can again be a bad look for your brand if you have unprofessional communications going out. So taking the time for that for sure. Just how to properly construct an email and a quote and an invoice, and maybe it's how to gracefully but effectively um, get payment on invoices, whatever it may be. Um, Written communication skills are certainly important. And then verbal communication skills as well. So this dovetails with customer service to some extent, but communication skills are just so important for your brand and your image, and ultimately the reviews of your company. So let's talk about training for managers and supervisors. And honestly, when I talk to companies and they talk about the time or the expense of rolling out training and what should they do. Um, well, I always recommend doing that harassment training to make sure your bases are covered there with the employees. If they have to choose one or the other in terms of training their employees or training managers and supervisors, I tend to always recommend the latter. Um, Managers and supervisors are a crucial part of your business, and they can be a crucial asset and a real invaluable asset to your business. On the other hand, they can also be a huge liability and a huge exposure and get you into a ton of trouble, and a ton of expense if they're not properly trained. So if you have to pick one group to train, I do generally recommend that be the managers and supervisors. Um, Recent studies have shown that 50, one recent study was 57%. I've seen numbers much higher than this, as well as some lower than this, but a number of workers do say they've left a job specifically due to their manager. So a bad manager can really be toxic to your retention efforts. Another thing to keep in mind, legally speaking, is that people with supervisory and managerial responsibilities are often seen as agents of the company. So this especially comes into play with, say, harassment situations. So let's say you have an employee who goes to their manager and says that they were being harassed, either by someone else at the company or by a client or a customer, and then that manager just tells them to brush it off, get over it, whatever. Because of that manager's position, um, they not only have they told the employee to brush it off and forget about it, the company has told them to brush it off and forget about it. They're acting as agents of the company. So it's really important that A, you have the right people in those seats, and B, that they're properly trained and understand the responsibilities that they have. It may not be that you want them to solve the problem with harassment, but they need to at least know enough to report that up to you or to HR or to whomever they need to, so that it's handled properly and compliantly. Um, just really important to recognize. So it might not be that they're harassing people themselves. If they are, that's certainly a whole other can of worms and can get you all kinds of trouble as an agent of the company. But more often we see it trip people up where those managers don't know how to act. It might be a harassment thing. It might be that um, someone needed some type of leave or asked to be out because of something that'd be covered either by the Americans with Disabilities Act or family medical leave or whatever it may be, and they don't handle that situation correctly. Again, the company hasn't handled that situation correctly because you've given them that responsibility and they haven't known how to do it properly. So just really important to get those managers and supervisors trained up. And then also, just as a nice to have, I think we've all hopefully all experienced the value of being able to promote, grow, develop employees from within. So just as I said, it's such a struggle to recruit and find new talent that if we have people with potential, we want to be able to develop them properly. So the more that you invest time wise in that development and make sure that the content is good, you can very easily take someone who walked in the door without any managerial skills and grow them into a top manager. It takes some time, it takes some work, but it's easier than you might think. And if it's the right person with the right potential and the right drive and the desire, you really just have to lead them in the right direction, and they'll take the education on like a sponge and really be a top performer for you before you know it. So in terms of some recommended coursework for training for managers and supervisors, um, these are six that have generally worked well for us and with our clients in helping strengthen and grow their management teams. If you do have managers or whoever you have involved in your recruiting and especially your interviewing process, highly recommend that you get them some training, both from a technique perspective. We promote and train on behavioral interviewing at MP. We find that to be effective, but aside from just being effective and having success with interviewing, from a compliance and a exposure standpoint, you want to make sure that they understand what questions they can and cannot ask in an interview and avoid getting your company in hot water based on asking inappropriate questions or making inappropriate comments, because we are definitely seeing a lot of those claims come in as well. And you'll see preventing harassment here. And so ideally, in a ideal situation, you do a company-wide harassment training with everybody, and then you dismiss the employees and you keep the managers and supervisors on hand for a separate session specifically for managers and supervisors, just to avoid those scenarios that I talked about in the previous slide. They really just need to understand their responsibilities, what what they need to do if they see harassment occur, or if someone reports harassment to them. Again, it's not necessarily meaning that they need to conduct an investigation and do all the fact finding and make a ruling, but we need to make sure we're finding out about it as business owners and decision makers, that they're reporting it up the channels properly, and B, that they're not doing anything that could be considered retaliatory, because as many harassment claims come in um, to either state level agencies or the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission at the federal level, the overwhelming majority of those have to do with retaliation. So someone was harassed at work or made a claim that they were harassed at work, and then someone at the company, a manager, a supervisor, or whoever, treated them differently or retaliated against them afterwards, and that caused a problem. So it's really important to teach those harassment fundamentals to your management team. Also, performance management. So whether you do annual reviews, whether you're having them do one-on-ones, or whether it's just a matter of you don't do any of that and you just want to make sure your team is performing up to standard, performance management training is a key skill for managers and supervisors to have, just to make sure that they're getting the most out of the teams that they can, that they're keeping the engagement strong, they're keeping the morale high. We have separate trainings on morale and engagement, but making sure employees are performing well, how to handle situations when they're not performing well, to correct those actions, and then really just keep a pulse on the organization and be effective leaders. Another great skill to be able to train, especially for new managers, is delegation. So in practice, we found that this is probably the number one most difficult skill for people new to management to do well. It's an advanced skill, but if you're looking to scale your business, it's an important one. I'm sure for those of you who started small and gradually built up your business, this was probably tough for you too, to get away from some of the day to day or get yourself out of the weeds and delegate work and trust in the people you're delegating to. So delegation training can be a really invaluable topic for especially new managers. You also want your team able to handle uncomfortable conversations, whether that be with staff or with customers. So, anyone in the customer service industry is going to have to deal with escalations and unhappy customers and clients. It's just a fact of life. So, making sure that those people aren't a liability, both from a legal perspective or a public relations perspective, can be really crucial. And then finally, as I spoke about in the other example, uh, you want to make sure that your managers are at least trained at a very surface level on how to handle leave and accommodation requests. So, um, for those of you who are larger, federal FMLA comes into play, but more and more often, now we're seeing so many states passing their own medical leave laws that even if you're a small employer, you could very well be subject to things like PFML. So you want to make sure that your managers know how to handle those situations, and also similar to harassment, that they're not retaliating against anyone who's returning from a covered leave, a job protected leave. And if someone's requesting some sort of accommodations because of a disability, that again, that they're at the very least handing that off to someone who knows how to handle it, and not telling someone to just toughen up and get through it. So in this day and age, there are a few different training formats. Um, it really depends on ultimately on your staff, um, and how well they respond and what's most effective for them. But depending on the company or the topic, You can certainly mix and match, but each has its own pros and cons. So the first of which is old school in-person training. Definitely find this to be more engaging. You're face to face with people. You can see whether they're paying attention or looking at their phones or drifting off or daydreaming. And you can call them out when they do. So definitely much easier to engage the audience when you're doing an in-person training, depending on the audience size. Easier to do group work, so you can just kind of divide up the room and have people work in teams or groups. Much easier to do that in person. You generally get more participation from in-person training. People will feel on the spot. They'll raise their hand. You can see who's engaged and who you might be able to call on. You can also call on people who you wish to. So generally more active, interactive participation in in-person trainings. In terms of the downsides, definitely tougher to schedule and coordinate. Um, if you're a business who's hired remotely and hired people from out of the area, it's tough to include them in in-person training. Certainly, you can do hybrids. I've seen it happen before where you've got an audience in person, and then the people who can't join are joining via Zoom or whatever. Really, you definitely see the difference in those circumstances where you might have a really engaged and interactive and um, talkative group in person, but it's so easy just to kind of forget about those people on the Zoom, or they just might feel a little disengaged from the event. Also, it's hard to replicate the in-person one repeatedly. So if you hire new employees, if you have people who are out sick or can't make it to the in-person training, it's tough to effectively get the information over to them. So it's just not the same experience unless you do the in-person training over and over again. There's then the virtual live training. So this has become more popular since the pandemic. Very easy to reach your remote audience. So if you do have people out of the area or people who, for whatever reason, can't come into a central location, they're able to participate the same way as everybody else. It also can be recorded, so you lose a little bit of the interactivity, but if you have a new hire, you can at least send them a link to the Zoom recording. Some some of these technology platforms do allow for breakout rooms, so it's no longer just whoever the speaker is lecturing the audience. You can put people in the breakout groups, assign activities. You can send out survey questions that people respond to live and get kind of live polling. So there are a lot more interactive options than there used to be with the virtual live sessions. It can be tough to track engagement. You don't know who's paying attention to the screen or who's taking the time to catch up on email, what have you. While it is possible to be interactive in the virtual live sessions, it's not always easy. It can be tough to herd everyone in where you want them to be and to get them to all participate equally. And then the execution of this and the success of it ultimately depends on technology. So depending on the makeup of your workforce and what you're doing for work, for people who are in an office setting and everyone has their own computer and laptop, very easy for everyone to sign in and attend. If that isn't the case, you might be having everyone join and the people who are in the office joining from a break room or a cafeteria and watching on a TV, where you have other people that are at their own computers. It can be difficult to rein in from a technology perspective sometimes with these. And then finally, you've got a learning management system or an LMS format training. So this is something where there's a LMS platform that's got a library of training. Some of them allow you to add your own custom content. Some of them don't. A lot of them will allow you to assign trainings to people or assign a course pathway for an employee or a group of employees. Um, it does allow the employees to, within reason, you can set deadlines and due dates, but allows the employees to go in and do the training when they have a chance to do it. They can also usually go at their own pace. If it's a long one, they might be able to get it started and say do an hour and do the rest afterwards. Very easy to track the completion, see who's done it, who hasn't. And usually, again, every LMS platform is different. Many of them do have a robust library of topics. So you might find some stuff that's specific for drivers, let's say, or specific for your industry. There might be safety trainings that you'd otherwise have to go to a separate vendor for, things like that. LMS trainings can be interactive, but unless there's a live component to it, there isn't an opportunity for employees to ask questions. Interactivity can vary widely from place to place. It might be completing a quiz at the end. There might be more to it where there are activities, interactive activities. I know some of the defensive driving courses especially will have like simulated driving scenarios and things like that. In order for an LMS to be effective, you do need some level of computer literacy among the workforce. So that can sometimes be a hurdle or a hindrance to the success of a training program strictly through LMS. And then also, unless you're creating the content and on a platform that allows you to host it there, you do lose some control of the content. It's not as easy as speaking to the facilitator of the training and saying, hey, can you cover this? Or can you use this example? Or can you be sure to mention that? It's generally kind of pre-recorded, pre-developed content, and you do lose some of the creative control when you work within an LMS. So ultimately, in terms of how you choose to deliver the content, again, sometimes it can be mix and match, but you want to think about what's going to be most effective for your company culture, and the people that you're going to expect to complete the trainings. Right. So it doesn't look like we have any other questions. Again, we will provide a link to today's recording, as well as a copy of the slides in a follow-up email later today. Again, for those of you who are NELA members, we do encourage you. You do have a website and a resource, an HR resource available to you through us. That can be found at mp-hr.com/NELA. That website will give you access to all of our HR educational content that we provide, all the webinars that we do, and also provides an opportunity for you to ask HR questions. So you don't have to be up at night wondering how to handle a certain HR situation. You can use the form on the NELA specific webpage through MP to submit HR questions, and one of our certified HR professionals will then respond to you with hopefully a resolution to your question or your inquiry. But and Rick just commented that is available to non-members too. So if you are attending today's session, even if you are not an official member of NELA, we do have that site available to you and be happy to help with any of your HR inquiries. But that does otherwise conclude today's session. I thank you for joining us. I hope you got some pointers or at least some ideas for topics for trainings. If you are interested, just about all of the topics that we talked about today from an employee and manager and supervisor perspective are things that we offer through MP, so I'd be happy to chat about that at your convenience. But otherwise, we wish you a great day, and please do reach out if we can ever be of assistance. Thank you so much.